So this is the hickory tree we're going to cut bark from. It's a fabulous specimen, and we think there's about between 36 and 40 clear feet of bark for the length of it, which is like nothing I've ever seen. And so the first task, we'll set to and get a draw knife and start to cut a swath off this outer bark. As I'm peeling the outer bark off of this, one thing I want to point out is this is a very big tree. It's 12 inches or more in diameter down at the bottom and 40 feet to the branches. Really, really big tree. Took Brendan and I 2 full days to harvest all the bark off of it, and that was with both of us working all day, both of those days. So for your first hickory to peel bark from, I'd suggest getting a smaller tree. This outer bark is very crusty and carries with it a lot of material that will dull your knife in a hurry. So I often will do this with 2 knives and use one for this outer bark and then a sharper one for when I'm dressing that inner bark to its finished thickness. So it's just a matter of slicing through that material. And at this point, I'm not really concentrating on shaving that bark, just trying to expose it. And then we'll cut a strip, and that will help us see the thickness of that material. Here's a knot in this part, just a little bump, and one of the things that can happen there is if you slice through it too carelessly, you can cut right through the inner bark down to the wood. So I tend to take a smaller slice around those, and ultimately might be you take the strip right beside that or around it. So you're looking at that band of dark and light.
Yeah, this. Because we'll see on the first strip, if it's really thick, we can take it down even a little further. And then both strips of our split will be really nice for weaving. But hard to tell until we take that first strip off.
Right.
Exactly how thick it's going to be. But
yeah, so I try to leave more on that first strip to then use it as a gauge left and right.
Right.
Yeah. Once we've sliced off enough of that bark, what we like to do is cut a strip right in the sort of top of the sapling all the way down the length and peel that one up. And I learned this from Jenny Alexander, and later found out Alexander loved hickory bark and hated hickory bark work. But I love to do this stuff. And what we did way back then was scored this with a knife. So I just take my Sloyd knife and score it like that and run that all down the length of the tree. Some might snap a chalk line, but it's too long. And what do we want for width?
1 inch.
Yeah. Right there?
A little more. Yeah.
A little more. So one of the things to think about when you're prepping this material is just like the tangential growth ring, this bark will shrink in its width. So you don't want to make it too narrow, because then you'll need even more bark to do your chair seat. So I used to score down through the bark and into the sapwood like that with a knife. And you can see it shreds the fibers and the knife gets gummy. And last year when we were out in these woods cutting this hickory, Brendan Gaffney had this great little gizmo that he's going to show us. I call it a pizza cutter, but that's not what it is.
I think it's a pretty apt description. So it's just a rotary cutter, for lack of, I like pizza cutter better. It's just a spinning sharp razor blade, so the edges here are sharp. The advantage over the knife is rather than dragging the blade through this sort of tangled, gummy inner bark, it's going to spin as it cuts, so it's sort of chopping the whole way in a spinning motion, and it does leave us with a cleaner edge. The spinning aspect also feels like it's a little easier to track straight, and it doesn't catch the grain quite so much, and you don't have to push quite as hard either, which is nice. So I would go down with one line before I start trying to bring the other along. Just sort of coming down here, trying to eyeball my sort of midpoint on the tree.
And you're going to carry this line all the way to the bottom.
And I'll go all the way to the bottom. And the tree doesn't go perfectly straight, so a chalk line here would actually cut across the grain or would even sort of defeat us in a few spots. So what I'm trying to do is sort of sit below, move backwards, and keep my eyes on the width of the trunk, and imagining that the side I'm cutting right now is just a little off, you know, on the right side of the center line here of what we've shaved so far.
Mm-hmm.
And the first line is the line that others will match, so in some ways it should be the best, but it also can be the worst. It shouldn't be, but we'll just have to make up for it with the next one. I'm probably pushing harder than I need to. I'm going to try pushing it, remembering that pushing it is actually easier. I don't remember.
Oh, you want to push instead of pull?
I don't remember. Trying to have last year come back to me.
Yeah, we should have checked the notes.
The year-on-year innovations are just, still takes a few minutes to remember. No, I think drawing it is the right way.
So there's always going to be some wiggle to the line. It's never going to be perfect, but it all works out fine on the chair.
Yeah. So I'm going to cross cut across here. So I've got a tab underneath that I can get under and grab it. Ooh. Yeah, it's really thick. So this is a pretty big and old tree. So we got a lot of bark here to work with. Get under it. Once I've got a little bit of it peeled up, because of the time of year, it should just be slipping right off. So I can pull on it. Oh, see, I've got a fiber still attached there, and I threw it.
And you threw your knife away.
There it is. So we got to make sure we get all the fibers severed before I start pulling on it. There it is. And now,
oh my, that is very thick.
Yeah.
Show me that thickness.
So just shaved through just the outer bark. You can see how thick this is. This might be the thickest of the trees I've brought down here before.
Is it 3/16?
Yeah, it might be 1/4 inch. I mean, it's really, it's serious. So we'll shave a little bit more before we peel the next one, but now we can walk down here. Good to have a knife.
Well, we could
out.
peel this one as is too. I mean,
You shave it.
shave the thickness.
Yeah,
of
yeah,
this
we could.
here. But I guess the benefit is we can see this.
Right.
Can you hold that up?
Yeah, yeah.
So the benefit of taking that strip off, we can now see that thickness as we work these adjacent strips. So this first one isn't really sacrificial. It'll still be a perfectly good piece of bark. It'll take some work off the tree,
right,
to prep it for weaving.
Yeah.
All right, go.
So Got to follow this down with a knife in any places that we didn't manage to sever completely. I don't think we knew just how thick this bark was going to be.
No, I didn't know we left it that.
So
I knew we were leaving it thick, but...
So there's a few spots here where we're going to be still attached to the tree. Ooh, boy. There we go. Now, we'll throw my knife away real quick. Oh, feel it grabbing, but it already released again. It's grabbing again.
So there you're going in and cutting on the tree again.
Yeah. Just in some spots where our cutter didn't quite make it through, which won't be as much of an issue when we shave this down a little closer to final thickness.
So now, with that strip off, we can see the thickness of this and dress it a little thinner than what came off of there. And it'll still be thick enough to split in half. But it'll make it easier to score it as well. Oh.
So I'm also trying to hold it a little more straight up and down. This is what I did last year. Now, I remember that I pushed it.
And you're using your left hand like a fence.
Yeah, and I can sort of feel it. I can get a better view of that nice straight line. So, I want to be able to see what's ahead of me, so I'm pushing this rotary cutter, and because I'm working to the left of the last cut, I've got the knife in my left hand, or the cutter in my left hand, and I'm sort of using my right hand just as a fence. I'm not exactly steering the cut with my right hand, but it is helping me keep track of the width of the strip that I'm cutting. And I can also feel...
And helps sort of steady you a little.
There. Yeah, and it helps steady the hand and keeps the knife from finding its own path a little bit. Helps push it in the right direction. And I'm trying not to follow every valley and peak of that first cut because it was a little wobbly. So I'm more thinking straight and making small adjustments here. And it does mean that the strip might change in width a little bit over its length, but my next strip will be better, and the next strip, and so on. And
yeah,
we're gonna make another, what, 33 strips here if everyone's an inch wide. Another 30 strips here, so we got a long bit of strip cutting ahead of us. So by my math, I think we can seat 15 chairs with this one tree.
And so that's just a matter of going down the whole length of the tree,
Yeah.
cutting that strip.
But I'm being as straight as I can be, but I'm certainly not tracking my width as well. That's what I'm looking forward. So there's something to be learned there over time. Shall we peel a 43.5-foot banana?
You're going to come from there.
All right.
Oh. You have so much confidence.
Gotta do it without hitting.
So as we found out, having that piece of bark thinner on the tree makes it easier to score. So I'm running my fingers along that strip with my thumb on the handle of the cutter and not bearing down very hard at all to slice. Oops. I like to peel it a little bit at a time, and I score along there. And then lift it up, and what I'm watching for are any fibers that are stuck to the sapling still. And you go back in with the knife or the cutter and sever those instead of just pulling the whole strip. You have to have a lot of confidence to pull the whole strip. I take it up piecemeal like that. This strip's still a little too thick, so I have lifted it up, and you can lay it right back where it was and shave it a little thinner. It's easier to handle on the tree than after. These sort of dark and light woven strands that run through the bark, that pattern can be a bit of a visual aid for you when you're shaving it, as a gauge for the proper thickness. And you want to kind of get them to the point where the wider one with the light streaks in it is a little reduced in its width. And over time you'll get a feel for what that pattern looks like as you go. It's not foolproof, but it helps. And but of course the real gauge is that thickness on the edge there. It's kind of work that you need to take a break and stretch from, because there's a lot of bent over posture. This log is too heavy to pick up the bottom end of it right now. And another thing that happens is the bark gums up your knife, and the simplest way to contend with that is to just stone it or strop it as you're working. Get that off of there. What I do to get rid of those little bits is to just stone it. I have a little slipstone I keep with me while I do this, and run it along the blade with the blade away from you, and that'll help keep that from clogging up your knife. And those same furrows are even telegraphed in the outer bark. They are really the cracks in the bark, and we had some rain, so they become a little better visible. And also here in the deep shade of the early morning, easier to see. When the sun hits it, it gets harder. Here you can see those alternating bands of lighter and sort of yellowy green, and And you want to shave it until that becomes less prominent. Here I've got a bit of a knot, and you can usually work with them all right, but I slice more through them, try to take a more careful shaving. So and one of the problems with them is there'll often be a physical bump, and the bark will get thinner on the top of it and thicker below it to sort of even it out here. So the thicker bark is a nuisance, but not a real problem. What's the problem is if the bark gets too thin around the knot. And ultimately, in strips this long, you'll have plenty of material to work with and be able to splice around defects. If I ended up having to cut this bark at 15, 20 feet, I could then splice the next piece on, lose a foot of it, and still be fine. Here's an even bigger knot than before, and this one could end up being a problem, but we'll know when we're peeling the bark off the tree. So first I'll shave it. So you see that bark coming up to the knot is thick. So slicing through it. And another issue with it is that when we took the adjacent strip, we wiggled around that knot. So what I want to do is cut that bump out like that. Ugh. You can see how the knife still follows those fibers. And pick that off. I'll ferret out down here below and make this strip a little straighter. There. I like to take the bark off the tree thick enough so that we can split each strip in half. And one thing that does is get you really nice consistent material. It also just about doubles your harvest of bark. And the clips I have to show you this process are from a couple different sessions. I used to leave the bark full thickness at harvest and then soak it as I needed and split it in half then. But what we found out in our most recent session was that the minute you take it off the tree is the time to split it. It just works so much easier then. So this strip of bark is thick enough that I think I can split it in half, or I'm going to try. And to give you an idea of how thick, I've tried to measure it, and I don't have the eyes or the tools to accurately measure this, but I think it's about 2.5/16 of an inch. And so the reason it's that thick is that it's easier to, it's faster to get a lot of them off the log with less shaving. But while it's on the log that's the best chance you have at shaving it evenly, but it just goes more slowly if you're getting each strip to its finished thickness. So I just hold the knife sort of like a pencil and just score across the bark, about trying to get halfway through its thickness, and then can bend that back and get that piece right there. So that begins the split with which I can then divide that piece of bark. So I'll show you how that goes. At this stage, it's a process that you have to watch the whole time. So I've sort of got it somewhat between my knees, but all the action is happening in my fingertips. I've got these fingers down on the bottom of down lower on the strip, and then my thumbs and forefingers are pulling it apart. It shouldn't surprise us, but what we found out is that dividing the thick bark in half right after you take it off the tree is the easiest of all. I've always done this later in the shop. When I have to weave the seed, I'd soak this bark to then peel it apart this way. But here it's coming apart with almost no resistance and very little attention. When you let it dry out and soak it to do this, you often have to get in there with a knife and correct some wayward splits. But right now all I'm doing is just, I scored it with a knife and then just divide it by essentially working my fingers like a riving brake, just pulling with my thumbs and forefingers against my middle fingers like that, and it produces the nicest finish. This is the inside of the inside bark. This is the side that was out towards the outer bark. This is the side that was on the tree. And you can use both of these strips. Some have a preference for one, some have a preference for the other. And just like with riving the wood, when one of these splits gets a little thicker, you pull harder that way. Here, the strip itself is thinner, so I might start to lose this a little bit right here. Let's see. It runs this way for a while. As soon as I turned the camera on, it went to shit.
Yeah, right.
Because it was just perfect. You know, the stupid joke about when the glue comes out, your IQ goes down. And my response is turn on 2 video cameras.
Yeah, right.
And see how smart you are then.
Yeah.
Because from time to time you get a strip of bark that for one reason or another you're not able to split it in half. I've heard that there's some species of hickory that won't split like that. I haven't run into that, but I probably haven't tried a lot of different species of hickory. And more likely the scenario I run into is one that just isn't prepared well, so it's a strip that varies in its thickness, and for that the solution is to shave it at the shaving horse with the spoke shave, and then you can sort of cherry pick and shave the thick parts down to match the thin parts. The strip you're going to see me working in this short clip is something that I had harvested and let dry and stored for who knows how long, and then when I was ready to weave a seat I soaked all the material and had to thin this strip. So you want to do this step while the strip is wet. And another way to deal with bark that's too thick to weave with is to shave it at your shaving horse. To do that, I like to make it taut. So I put a clamp on this end and do that. And go at it not with the draw knife, but with a spoke shave. And it's slower than dividing it, than splitting it. The bark tends to gum up the blade of the spoke shave a lot, but it's a nice way to do it. I think I said the best place to trim the bark is on the tree, and this sort of mimics that in that I've got this extension stick, just a piece of scrap that I had in the shop, to support the bark. And you can lift it to gauge your progress. And then feed along the next section. This bark is behaving pretty nicely. I can try it without the clip, without clamping that free end. But you see what it jams up the spoke shave with these really stringy, wet, fibrous shavings. And this is pretty much just out of the water. I have a thin spot there, thinner, right here than here. And I can see that by the pattern on it. This pattern, these darker strands and then these crisscrossed lighter strands, as you're shaving the bark on the tree, you're watching that pattern emerge, and in the thicker parts it's much more bold. As you get thinner, like right there, the dark bits get narrower. So that's how I could see that that part of the bark right there is a thickness I like. So I don't want to be hitting that with my spoke shave right now. But this right adjacent to it is too abrupt a switch in the thickness. So this has to come down. I didn't take the time to sharpen this spoke shave today. And that wouldn't have hurt me any if I'd done so. It's pretty sharp, but it could always have been touched up. But I just have to get through this one strip, I think. There we are. So to sum up this process, there aren't that many steps to it. After you've felled the tree, or even better, someone else has felled the tree, shave off the outer bark, shave the inner bark to the desired thickness, and score it into strips, and then peel those strips off the tree. And now I split them right then and there in half, and then wind those strips up into coils like this. You want the strips to dry. I don't put them out in the sun, but I want some air around them for the first day or two, just to keep them from getting moldy. And then I hang them up in the shop wherever I can and pull them down as I need them.